We are transfixed here. Tracy, an owl got out of the zoo and entertained us for a year.
Flaco the Eurasian eagle owl. Yeah, he was great. You would see people taking photos of him, and he would be sort of peeking into apartments, and everyone started viewing him as the sort of like symbol of freedom in New York City. Very sadly, he died last week after an apparent collision with a building. This is actually a big problem with skyscrapers.
Into a window, right?
Yeah, there's some discussion about maybe he ate a poisoned rat, and so he was a little confused. But yes, he died. It's very sad. However, I'm pleased to say this provided a little bit of an excuse for Odd Lots content. We actually did an episode on economic ornithology.
Explain that.
This is something that existed for a really long time.
It's a real profession.
Yeah, a real profession. There were actual economists who would sit in government offices, dissect the stomachs of birds to see what they had eaten. So literally, this robin has had like 2 earthworms and 15 flies and 20 bits of grain, and try to figure out a value for the birds on a net basis.
For the farmers.
Can we say that the birds, and I've witnessed it personally, they're keeping the rat population down in New York City? Is
it
that
seems
a
to be
statement?
true. This is the interesting thing. There's this whole profession, which I just learned about. First of all, while Tracy was fascinated with the Flaco the Owl story of freedom over the last year, I'm not going to lie, I first learned about it when I got the push alert that he had died.
Me too. That was the same.
That's two kinds of people in this world. But they really they actually had economists, or they called them economists, cut them open, and they say, well, this bird on net saved the farmer's X because it ate this many pests, etc. Really? Yeah, and there's a real profession housed within the Department of Wildlife. It'll be out Friday.
It's in honor of Flaco.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's all about the lost science of economic ornithology. We don't do it that much anymore because nowadays we have pesticides.
But apparently the intuition, per your point about keeping the rat, like that intuition that birds were beneficial for that reason has been borne out over the years.
Can I just, for those on YouTube, you can witness this with Ari's great camera work. If you're on radio on Apple CarPlay, Paul, you're styling it this morning. Tracy looks like she's pushing Balmain here as look of the day.
It is vintage Balmain.
It is.
How do you know that?
That's what I do. And I tried to dress down for Wiesenthal. Wiesenthal looks like Light Sweet Crude did 3 encores last night, and he came directly from the bar. I don't know what that's about.
This is my Fred St. Louis Federal Reserve economic data pullover 3-piece. So it's not quite as chill as the radio listeners may be getting the impression.
All right, Tracy, we got some inflation data tomorrow. How are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, so this is another thing. We have an episode coming out on tomorrow specifically.
So you got the bird episode Friday, you got inflation tomorrow.
We have
priorities.
We have varied interests. Okay. Let's just put it that way. But we're digging into the difference in how PCE versus CPI is actually calculated.
This is important.
Yeah.
It's so important, and we have seen a divergence over the past few years. That divergence has increased. It's starting to narrow now, but of course the question is, when we say the Fed's preferred measure of inflation is PCE, what do we actually mean? What is that measuring?
Yeah, it's really interesting because not only do they capture a lot of things. So PCE turns out it's much wider variety of goods. It's not strictly consumer price indices. It's trying to measure wider things, but also it has a lot of interesting imputations. And so things go into the PCE that aren't prices the way we see prices in, say, a grocery store where you can look at the price of eggs, or and so trying to figure out like the imputed value of how much do you pay your bank for checking services, or how much do you pay a portfolio manager, things that don't have a price tag. And it's really fascinating to figure out how economists try to solve the problem of putting a price on something that doesn't have a price tag.
There was actually a stat in the episode that blew my mind, which is 13% of PCE comes from imputed prices. Yeah. So unobservable things.
Who imputes that?
Well, I guess it's the Bureau of Economic Analysis.
The BEA, that's right.
I'm a big
the economist
believer,
there.
Joe, you grew up with the Dallas Tribune, the Cleveland series. I'm biased to Cleveland, but that's just because, the Indians. But, the answer is these cottage industry inflation statistics, and Chairman Powell has mentioned the Dallas Tribune as having validity. Did that come up in your conversation?
Well, as Tracy pointed out, the proper way to do inflation analysis, and I subscribe to this wholeheartedly, is to look at all of the different ways of measuring inflation. Trim me and lop off the edges, and then pick the one that suits the storyline. And I fully agree with that. So when it's Cleveland Fed, I go with that. When it's PC, I go with that.
And seriously, Paul, Jason Furman up at Harvard has a nice amalgamated series of X number of inflation trying to guesstimate it. I'm sort of agnostic on it. I don't know.
Well, you can also just choose an actual thing as your personal measure
Tracy
of inflation.
chooses mayonnaise.
I choose mayonnaise. I've been tracking that for several years.
Wait. There's an international date line here. Hellman's or the goo out west?
So I've specifically been looking at Kraft Extra Heavy mayo. Wow. The buckets. Did you know you can get buckets of it on Amazon?
Joe, what'd you grow up with? I mean, you had such a twisted childhood.
I did. I grew up in a family of hippies, so we probably had some sort of vegan mayonnaise in my house.